Do you ever feel like you're speaking, but no one's really listening to you? Or maybe you're at this point where you're wondering if your personality is actually the reason you're not being taken seriously as a leader. Or maybe you're questioning what you're doing wrong that's keeping your team disengaged. Well, I've been there personally, my friend. In fact, I also started from a place of struggle, specifically in this area. But now, years later, I lead seminars, workshops, and talks in small as well as large organizations, and I've been able to take what I've learned to arm managers with the vital tools to improve in their communication capacity. Which is why in this video, I want to share with you the secrets to becoming a clear, confident, and charismatic communicator. And we'll also unlock some powerful public speaking tips that will actually elevate your leadership presence. So first, when I say the word leader, what comes to mind for you? Is there a particular person or maybe a set of personality traits that comes up for you? Maybe it's something like this.
There are two things that I think that great leaders need to have: empathy and perspective. And I think these things are very often forgotten. Leaders are so often so concerned about their status or their position in an organization, they actually forget their real job. And the real job of a leader is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in our charge.
I'm sure you would agree that that was a pretty charismatic communicator right there. But we don't all look or sound like that. So does that mean that those of us that don't are doomed to stay in the shadows forever? Well, take a look at this and you tell me.
Vulnerability is not weakness. And that myth is profoundly dangerous. Let me ask you honestly, and I'll give you this warning. I'm trained as a therapist, so I can outweight you uncomfortably. So if you could just raise your hand, that would be awesome. How many of you, honestly, when you're thinking about doing something vulnerable or saying something vulnerable, think, God, vulnerability is weakness, this is weakness? How many of you think of vulnerability and weakness synonymously?
So what did you think? Well, I think you would agree that both communicators are very different, but they were both effective. Reason being, they leaned on their natural personalities and communication styles in order to be effective. And I would also argue that they've both spent years doing the reps, right? Developing mastery over their craft of communicating. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, I don't know, Mac, mastery? I'm watching this because I can barely get a sentence out without wobbling. Plus, no one ever seems to hear me. To which I'll say, I get it. But stick with me here because I want to show you just how quickly you can make improvements to your communication no matter how far off you might feel right now. To do that though, we need to start by looking at what you're doing that might be stopping people from really hearing you. So I want to use some examples and I want you to see if you can spot the issue, all right? So let's start with example number 1. When you get the chance, Nancy, if it's okay, would you be able to send me that report? So, did you spot the issue? Well, there was a couple in there, but the main one I want to double click on here is the use of passive language. Do you need this thing or not? Because if you do, then it should be framed as such. You know, sometimes people don't hear what we say because we're giving them reason to. So practice using active language like, can you get me the report by Friday at 3 p.m.? Or my commitment is to do XYZ by the end of the day. Active language is empowering, it's accountable, and it's necessary as it relates to your expectations and needs. But let's say you're listening to this and you're like, well, Mac, I actually do use active language all the time. I'm very clear about my expectations, and yet people still don't listen to me. Well, my question to you would be, are you making this mistake? I want you to see if you can spot what the issue is in this example. Nancy, could you get me the report on Friday by 3 p.m.? Well, my commitment is to do XYZ by the end of the day. Did you spot the issue? It was a tone, right? The tone of your voice can significantly impact how a message is received. I mean, think about the last time that something was said to you in a tone and how it made you feel. Now, I want to pause here for a second because I talk to my students about this all the time, and it is an important point because the tone of your voice directly impacts the way that someone feels. Meaning our tone can lead someone to feel as though what we're saying is not important. It can lead someone to feel as though they shouldn't be confident because we don't sound confident. And on the flip side, it can cause someone to feel instant stress or tension, which then impacts their focus. All of this simply from the tone of our voice, which is something that we take for granted. But what I've come to learn is that my voice is a valuable tool or an instrument that has the ability to move people. I mean, think of some of the best speakers that you know, right? I bet you anything, before you think of what they said, You probably thought about how they made you feel, maybe inspired or energized, or like you could do the thing that you thought was complicated. Why is that? Because they know that their voice is an instrument. So when you communicate things of importance specifically, you actually need to drop the pitch of your voice and slow down, because a clear and assertive voice conveys importance and urgency. And if you want help with this, I want you to consider joining us in NMA, because I break down the tactics of the instrument of your voice in the program, and I also give you an opportunity to practice it in the group sessions so that you are matching the tone to the situation. It's honestly one of my favorite things to do with the group, because a lot of people actually don't realize how they're coming off because they don't have that mirror, right? That's saying, this is how you sound. So check out the details of NMA by going to makitaandrews.com/training to get more details about the New Manager Accelerator program and if you would be a fit for joining us. Now, there is this one other thing that some of us are guilty of that can absolutely damage our credibility. So a couple of weeks ago on this channel, in this video right here, I actually mentioned the need to be brief. And someone left a comment on the video that they were given some feedback by their manager on the need to be brief, and that it was actually hard for them to get adjusted because they prided themselves on being detailed so that someone wouldn't ask them questions or any follow-up questions. And then they went on to say something about people being lazy and only wanting tidbits of information, which was interesting for a whole different reason, but I digress. Anyways, here's the point. Our communication, right, whether it's verbal or written, is measured at the other person's ear and not at our mouth. So we might be lovers of providing information, detail, and context because that's what we need. But if the person doesn't hear it, doesn't understand it, and doesn't take action on it, does it matter? No, right? As leaders, our focus is not what we need, but what our team needs to meet the outcome. And the sooner we get that lesson, the sooner we will excel in our roles. So speaking like a leader means being brief, providing the necessary context, and then inviting questions. Our aim should never be to provide so much information that someone doesn't need to ask us questions, because that's not displaying leadership. But what is inviting people to consume the amount of information that they can and then trusting them to reach out with the questions that they need in order to take said action. So long as we make that clear from the beginning and we frame and convey any information that we provide with a really good flow. So here's the thing I want to tell you about communication. Everything I mentioned today is important. And at the same time, if you're trying to do everything right, you might actually fail at everything because of the cognitive load, right? You're trying to remember too much. So what I want you to do is just pick one thing and make it muscle memory before you add more. But there's something else that you should know when it comes to communication, because if you're struggling with confidence when you communicate, it's actually often more than just a communication skills problem. For example, let's say you want to communicate clearly, but you aren't clear on what you're trying to say. Or you want to sound confident in what you're delivering, but you're not necessarily confident you made the right decision either. Do you see the problem? To sound like a leader, you need to feel like a leader. And that's not something that you can fake. So if you're struggling with your confidence as a manager and you really want these newfound skills to help, do yourself a favor and watch this video here next.